Can I get you to jump up on your feet? I know you can sigh, it's the afternoon. Please stand. Please stand, please stand. It's good, it's good. Okay, we are going to quickly recap. We're going to quickly recap. Just turn the music off. Cool, we're going to quickly recap the game. Remember this one? Atumba. What is that? Atumba. 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 Babanta. Atumba. Kanatra. Okay, Atumba. Atumba. Kanatra. That's good. I won't make you do it because we're short of time. But because we're in Thailand and because we were just getting to know each other, I thought can you just turn to the person beside you and just do a wee Thai massage on their shoulders? Just get to know them for a moment. Just as a wee wake up. There we are, that's good. Okay, now try the other way too. Do the other way. Turn and do the other way. There we are, that's good. Okay, and do the padding to the end. Okay, that's great. Now, and draw your attention back to the front. Come back to the front. And the last one, since we're just going to wake up before I hand over to our fabulous panel, I just want you to, let's just do a couple of squats to warm up. So we're just going to go like this. Come on, just a couple. We've been sitting down all day. This is just volunteering to keep ourselves healthy. There we are, there's a couple more. Okay, now grab a seat. Okay, you can sit down now. So we have a fantastic panel to close off the day today. So I'm just going to hand over now to the MC, who is Reynold Meyer, who is Thailand's representative for the United Nations Development Program. Reynold, it's a terrific privilege to have you here. Thank you for supporting IAVE. And I'll pass over to you for the panel.
Very good. Thank you very much, Sam, and good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon!
Oh my God. I was told this was a good crowd. Okay. You have no idea how happy I was to be here when you guys were. It's already been a long week and a long day for me, so but I'm a bit jealous about the massage, because I have to pay 250 baht to get that. You all got it for free, right? Or maybe there were financial arrangements that I'm not aware of. That's possible also. Anyway, very good to be here with all of you. I'm quite excited about this session, although I got a little bit worried when I arrived because I was given some information that I have a hard time to believe. And that information was, be careful, very few know about the Sustainable Development Goals. Sacrilège, as we say in French. I'm French, by the way, so you'll hear a lot of French words coming in and out. Sacrilège means, well, I don't know actually, unbelievable or, not acceptable. And our session is called Flipping the SDGs Conversation. And I have always been told by my parents, do not flip things you don't know. So, can I have a show of hands? Who knows about the SDGs? Oh, fake news, fake information. That's what I was given. Okay, very good. Amelia, we have to talk after the session, because another thing that I was told by my parents was, do not talk to people you don't know. Do you know those people? I have the privilege of knowing them, but I want to share this information with you. So let me introduce the panel first, and then we'll go into the issue. So, should I start with, no, I was going to do some bad jokes, but it's never good. ADRIENNE. ADRIENNE is from Australia. And she comes with a long experience of, it's difficult to believe she has such a long experience looking at how I thought child labor was forbidden in Australia, but that's volunteerism, right? So it doesn't count. but the long experience on volunteer, both at local and also at national level, and she currently is the CEO of Volunteer Australia. And then we have my dear friend and colleague, the one I know the most on the panel, because she belongs also to the United Nations. Manon Barnier is the current regional manager for the UNV office here in Asia Pacific, and has been with UNV for quite some time. And we've interacted over many, many years on how to promote volunteerism using the UN as a platform. And then the person I've met very recently, and I had the privilege of paying him a visit in his office. At the beginning, I thought, no, there's a mistake. I mean, this is not a medical conference, right? Because this gentleman here is a doctor, and not any doctor, a doctor in epidemiology. So like, huh? What? But you will hear the story of the professor, because it's really fascinating how from being a medical student first and then a medical doctor and specializing in epidemiology, and has moved down in a fascinating yet complex part of Thailand, which we call the Deep South. And I'm sure he will tell us a bit more about the background when he speaks later on the panel. But apart from teaching and researching and practicing maybe a bit less these days, but another one of his hobbies, and because I think he's a very passionate man, is to promote volunteerism and to use volunteers in the Deep South to address the situation and, of course, improve overall social cohesion down in those provinces. So what is flipping the SDGs conversations all about? I will say, I mean, maybe just because we like to move and stuff. And okay, you pretend you know about the SDGs. So here's the question. Those who believe that it is the responsibility of the UN to deliver the SDGs, stand up or raise, no, you look tired. Raise your arm. So those who think it is the responsibility of the UN to deliver the SDGs, raise your arm. Okay, either we're not on the same channel or you know the answer. Nobody, okay, good. That's a good point for everyone. Who believes it is the responsibility of the governments to deliver the SDGs? Ah, a few hands, okay. You have to stay for the second session. I will do a special one for you. Because that is the wrong answer. Who believes it is the role of volunteers to deliver on the SDGs? You answer yes for all. I mean, it's a good tactic because at some point you got to get right. No, I mean, I'm not giving you any of the correct answers, right? Because I think you all know that the responsibility of delivering the SDGs is at the level of the countries. Yes, it is the government who has signed in New York the Agenda 2030, of which the SDGs are part of, but the overall agenda is a commitment by governments of the countries. And what do we mean by countries? It means that there is a responsibility for every single element, part, segment of those countries, be it the government, who we expect them to put up frameworks to align the SDGs and the planning and the budgets and of course the projects of the government, but also of civil society, also of the private sector, of local communities, and we expect a large voluntary contribution from the individuals like yourselves, right? So this is what the flipping the conversation is all about, is to kind of get the myth out of our way and really understand. So when I am working with my government counterpart here in Thailand, or I was doing it in other countries before, hello Nepal, where's Nepal? Yeah, hi Nepal, I miss you. Yeah. I had to pay them a lot of money for them to say that, by the way, okay? Now, when I tell them, you know, we have to do this on the SDGs, I end up getting told, oh, you and your SDGs. Wrong answer, right? It's not my SDGs. It is as much my SDGs as it is your SDGs. So I've discovered that my advocacy was maybe a little bit wrongly tuned, because I was always Mr. Champion of the SDGs and morning, breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, tattoo in the back. No, it doesn't work. right? Because it's like I'm keeping them for myself. What I should really make sure that people understand is that they all have something to contribute to the SDGs. So I stopped talking about the SDGs, and I started talking about the values that were underpinning the SDGs. And one argument is very simple to make. Is anyone in this room against reducing poverty, providing fresh, clean, drinkable water for all? Is anyone against a clean environment? Is anyone against decent jobs? Is anyone against reducing inequalities? Is anyone against adapting and addressing climate change? Who is against peace? Right? The beauty of those 17 goals is that till now, I still have not found a single individual who told me I'm against them. You cannot. These are the aspirations of just about everyone. Now, of course, the issue is how do we get there? How much does it cost? What do I need to do? Am I ready to do that? What are you doing instead of just preaching? But that's what the conversation is all about. It's about identifying what we all can do, not so much for the sake of the 17 colors or the 17 logos, no, or because the government has signed. It's just because it makes sense. And it makes sense because those SDGs are fundamentally based on rights. Our rights. Rights to clean environment, rights to work, rights to have a roof, rights to access to food, etc., etc. So we all feel very much connected to those. And if you explain them this way, then immediately you are successful in mobilizing your audience. You're captivating your audience. Somebody got it, thank you. But you're not my audience, you're their audience. And I'm just the moderator, I'm not a panel member. So I'm gonna stop talking, and I'm gonna start introducing and moderating this panel. And the first person to speak will, I think, give us a nice refresher of the SDGs from a volunteering perspective. And I cannot think of anyone better than Manon to do this for us. So Manon, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Renaud. Always hard to speak after such a lively, engaging, and dynamic introduction, so I would try to keep with the same energy as you had, Renaud. Maybe we can put the presentation up. I just realized that. Okay, sounds good. Okay. Yeah, I will need the clicker. Yes. I think we're good. Good to go. Okay. Good to go. Okay, so as the first presentation on this panel, I work for UNV Regional Office, right? So we cover the overall region, and it's to give a little bit of perspective of where do we stand on volunteering and the SDGs in Asia Pacific, and what is the UN doing together with member states and different stakeholders to try to further integrate and make really volunteer recognized as a stakeholder to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, no? Okay. The next slide, anyway, is just a big picture of all the SDGs. So, because I feel often we just think about SDGs now, like if it's one thing, no? But when we deep down, it's all about the development issues that we face, not only in the South, but everywhere in the world now, since inequalities is really becoming one of the main issue worldwide, no matter where we are sitting in the world. Still not? Yes. Here it goes. I manage. It worked. Okay. So I think Renaud, you introduced it very well, but what is so important about the SDGs is that it's an agenda that is global. It's for every single country, that you are in Europe, that you are in Africa, in Asia. Everybody recognizes that development issues now are interconnected, and they're really they cannot be solved only by one group of people or one government. They have to be addressed by everyone, no matter where you are in society. So that's a big recognition it changed the whole way we look at development. It's not only north, south, or the government versus other stakeholders. It's really calls on everyone's involvement. And I'm actually very pleased because 2 years ago I was in the Asia Pacific conference. Who was there in Malaysia? Anyone was there? So you must have heard my presentation. I was one of the only ones who was talking about the SDGs. And actually 2 years later, I just heard last year the global conference was a lot about the Sustainable Development Goals. And now I see there was a full afternoon, and I saw very interesting initiative from Pakistan, Bangladesh, Mongolia in the earlier session on how you are actually taking this agenda and partnering with government, partnering with different organizations to really translate it into concrete action. So I can really see that from 2 years ago to now, from SDG being a word that almost no one knew, I think there's a much bigger awareness. And when Renaud was asking, a number of you know, has actually raised your hands. So from the beginning, when the member states were discussing the 2030 agenda, like this new development agenda, there was a recognition that volunteer groups were actually very important. Who are around reaching out at the community level? Who are around bringing the voices, those ones who don't have space to actually express their concern? Most of the time, and very often, it's actually volunteer groups. So there's a recognition that volunteers are an important stakeholder that needs to be engaged, considered, and recognized as a very important stakeholders for the Sustainable Development Agenda. And there's actually a global plan of action worldwide agreed by all member states that they should make efforts to actually integrate and make sure volunteer group can participate in the planning, implementation, and monitoring of the SDGs. Whoops, okay. Where do you think, I would like you to raise your hands if you think we are ahead of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Are we ahead of targets in Asia Pacific overall? No one thinks we're ahead of targets. Are we behind targets? Who would think we're behind targets? Behind targets, behind targets. Okay, okay. Let's see where we are, actually. This is the Sustainable Development Goals, progress in Asia Pacific by the different goals, no? Poverty, hunger, good health. And you can see that the line is pretty much where we should be in 2018. So I think we are already behind, no? And there is a risk that we will not achieve the SDGs. And worst, actually, we are actually going backwards on some of the issues, which is even more concerning and really needs to call for action of everyone to make sure we can achieve those goals, no? So this is a consolidation from Asia Pacific. But I'm curious to know how many of you have actually looked in your countries. Where do you stand on SDGs? Because most of countries are actually monitoring and reporting. Do you know which area in your country are moving forward? Which ones are going backwards? This is really the first step where you can start engaging with the different stakeholders. If you know, okay, in my country, clean water and sanitation is one of the issues that we're really lagging behind, or maybe other issues, life below water is the biggest concern, no? So trying to start having an analysis from the different countries so we can actually monitor progress altogether. Because countries have to report. It's not just an agenda that is sitting there and then is nice and we'll see in 2030 if we have achieved, no? Member states are actually have the responsibility to report to the in New York to the high-level political forum of the UN on how they are actually implementing. What strategy do they engage? How do they work with civil society? How do they work? How do they engage citizens? And what progress do they have? And this is where you can actually engage as stakeholders and as volunteer group and find ways to engage with your government on those processes. If you know what is the status of the SDGs in your country. So we were actually asked, together with the International Federation of Red Cross, UNV was asked to actually help facilitating this process, because one of the key elements that volunteer organizations were telling us 2 years ago was that they don't really know what the SDGs are, no? And how does that connect to the work that the volunteer sector is doing. So we have launched a call to member states and to volunteer organizations to produce a national situation on volunteering and how do they contribute to the SDGs. And we have produced it's a first attempt, but it's still a first step forward to look at volunteering throughout Asia Pacific. We receive national reviews from a number of countries in the region, and we have produced the first a little bit analysis to try to give us an indication. It's not a perfect tool because availability of data is a challenge, but at least see where is the volunteer sector contributing, and how can we, what is needed to actually provide more space for volunteer organization to engage with SDGs. So in our State of the World Volunteerism report, we have been able to measure for the first time an estimate on the scale and size of volunteering in Asia Pacific. But based on the estimate, it's the equivalent of 28.7 million full-time volunteers in the whole Asia, because a number of people don't volunteer necessarily full-time. So if you accumulate all the hours of volunteers in Asia Pacific, it's a huge force that is out there already mobilized, and even more that can be mobilized further, that are making differences in the community every day. But we also find out that most of volunteer is actually informal volunteering. It's not organized. It's not part of an organization. It can be organized, but it's not in a register organization. It's in the communities. It's helping others in their communities. And this sector is really not properly documented, no? So we have very little data and information on how volunteers are actually contributing to development. We also find out that there's more women actually in the informal volunteer sector, while there are more men in the structured volunteer sector. Most probably because in the informal, there's a lot of community work, self-help that is happening at the community level. On the more policy framework, we also find out that 27 countries, and you can find the detail in the publication after if you are interested, but 27 countries have started trying to measure, because one of the issues is that the work that volunteers are doing is invisible. Everybody found it very nice, but when you start about development results, it's not mentioned, it's not recognized as an actor. But actually 27 countries have started to measure, including either in labor survey, or national statistics, with National Statistics Office have started collecting data so we can give it a little bit more visibility, right, to the sector, so we are really recognized. You also have volunteer registration system in terms of infrastructure. We know that if we want to be able to measure, we need a policy framework, we need mechanism to make sure that volunteers that we can generate more data. And so you have countries who have started and have in place for many years registration system. Of course, the lack of budget for volunteering came out as an issue in most of the countries. That in most of the countries in Asia Pacific, there is more and more structured volunteering, more formal volunteering from the government who want to establish national schemes, from volunteer organizations that are organizing themselves. And I think we can see it with those conferences as well through IAVE that are becoming bigger and bigger and attracts a broad range of stakeholders, no? that in Asia Pacific, volunteerism is very often mainstream in youth policy. It attracts a lot. Someone was asking, how do we bring young people to understand the SDGs and engage? Well, volunteering is seen as an avenue by a number of Ministry of Youth to actually engage more people. And 12 countries actually have policy framework on volunteering. What is needed, though, is that the sector, as I mentioned earlier, is not very well documented. We need data, we need evidence if we want to be taken seriously by policymakers. Otherwise, we're nice to have, we're not considered a strategic actor. How do we document more informal volunteering? A lot of things are done through informal volunteering. It's not documented. Private sector start to restructure its volunteer sector. Again, still ad hoc-ish approach, I would say, here and there. How do we make this engagement strategic and really linked to development result and strategies, no? So through the analysis of the report and the data that we receive from the different countries in Asia, we actually, there were some trends of where volunteers in Asia Pacific can really make a difference and a contribution for the SDGs. And this was really the four below in really addressing inequalities. And we know that this is at the heart of the Sustainable Development Goals. Development happens so much over the last 20, 30 years, but the problem is the inequality of that development. And that's the core issue that we need to address. And volunteers have a very important role to play to address those inequalities. And if the Sustainable Development Goals, if we don't address inequalities, we're not achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, no? The demographic changes came out in most of the report, aging, and I know there was a session earlier, aging population in a number of countries in Asia Pacific. This is still an area that many countries are interested in, how we can tap more into volunteers, citizens, senior citizens that still want to be active, can still contribute, but they're retired. They need services, but they can also contribute. This is a sector that is starting, but still that generate a lot of interest, but still more strategies and alignment again to development results that can be done. Addressing gender equality as well. And of course, climate change came as a very important issue in the region. Of course, Asia Pacific being the region the most prone to disaster, and how volunteers can work actively in that sector. So these are really cross thematics where volunteering in this region can have a strong impact if properly supported, channeled, recognized, and coordinated with policymakers. So the report also looked at key messages. Again, the data availability, measuring the impact, and how do we make volunteers accelerator of the SDGs. These are some, I will go quick because I think I have a few more slides, but how do we, there's very good examples in the region. And again, I invite you to read the report and connect on how volunteers are really helping addressing inequalities. So based on this report, we have actually organized at the beginning of the year a regional consultation. Some of you were there as well. We brought together government representative, volunteer involving organization, academia, private sector, to kind of reflect on those findings and see what are the issues, how do we bring this agenda forward together. So we had close to 100 people coming, and there's not a lot of spaces where you bring government and volunteer sector at the regional level together to discuss those issues. And there were very clear key messages that came out from the regional consultation on what should be some of the priorities. And I'll start by the last one, the bottom down. One of the realization was that you have the Ministry of Planning, the sectorial ministries, they're moving with their development agenda. And then on the other side, you have volunteer organizations, volunteer sector, working exactly on those same area. No connection between those conversations. How many of you have discussed with representatives from Ministry of Planning or sectorial ministries how we can connect? So it happens in some areas, but it's not necessarily consolidated approaches. So there was requests from the participants and even from member states to say, we need to bring those conversations closer together and find very operational strategy. Again, in this region, particularly the focus on aging and how volunteer program can help address. And then really the need for evidence, because a lot of the things that you are working on actually generate results. It's just that we don't have the evidence to actually demonstrate it, no, from that sector. So basically, what this consultation want to do for the region, what the participants were recommending, is actually make sure we bring more conversation to integrate volunteering in sectorial development discussions or in SDG overall planning, monitoring conversation. Also to make sure that volunteering, that an enabling environment for volunteering always remain appropriate to local context. There's not one set for all, there's not one model from one country, and every culture, every country develops its model based on its local context. And also, yeah, again, I'm repeating again, but yeah, really how, another area is how volunteers, and there were very good examples for those who were not there in the previous session in this room from Pakistan, Bangladesh, Mongolia. Can you raise your hand if you were the panelists? Where are they? One from Bangladesh, Undral from Mongolia, and Pakistan, there, yeah? They had wonderful examples on how they have engaged thousands of volunteers to collect data on SDG and then go to policymaker and say, hey, we have this data, this service needs to be improved. How do we work together? How do we mobilize even more volunteers to address this service, no? And then again, the data. So, building on this, I'm looking at Undra because she was there 2 days ago. We were thinking, okay, but how do we bring those conversations together? The SDG and the volunteer sector, how do we do that? We've never really engaged, even UNV planning ministry. It's not our counterpart. We don't really engage with them. So we thought, okay, let's bring them in the same room. Let's do a few countries, and let's bring planning ministry, volunteer organization, and government in charge of volunteering together to have a conversation and see how we can, what do we get out of this and how, if it helps. And this is an example, actually, and we use a systemic a methodology of system thinking. And this is an example from Mongolia, where she's actually from the Ministry of Planning in Mongolia. And they have looked, this is a diagram that it's not obvious, but it's on air pollution. They analyze air pollution. And you see the circle, the black SDGs are all the SDGs related to governance. If you want to solve air pollution, it's not only about environmental issue, but it's also a governance issue, no? And how citizens can actually help building more effective institutions to address air pollution. And then all the other SDGs in oranges and red are actually more environmental related SDGs that have an impact on air pollution. And then the sticker, the yellow sticker, is actually where volunteers are playing. And they realized through data collection in Mongolia, and Undra can talk about it more, they have been able to generate data that they're using to impact the policy level. And then they also have volunteers mobilized in each of the small SDGs that have an impact. It was quite an eye-opening for the government, actually, and I think for the volunteer sector to work together and see, oh, wow, if we work on this system together, imagine how we can have a much stronger impact on development. So we are slowly trying, it's first steps, but this is what we are trying to do at the UN with the partners to see how we bring those conversations together. So in this whole process, UNV and the International Federation of Red Cross have been asked to coordinate a meeting in New York next year. To actually, it's called Reimagining Volunteering for the 2030 agenda. And it's really to try to take stock of the progress that has been done so far for the last, since the adoption of the SDGs, and what are the different innovative model and experience that countries, volunteer involving organizations, governments, research institutes have done to actually engage intentionally, I would say, and more intentionally volunteers to achieve the SDGs. So there will be this big meeting, and there will be different ways to act. It's just a meeting, but this is mainly a call for action for the next 10 years. No, it's nothing. We have only 10 years. We already have 1/3 of the time for the plan that is gone. So there will be different trends looking at, there's a big call for documenting evidences, developing new tools and mechanism. And we will be launching, there will be a lot of ways to engage, not only on this meeting, but on this new acceleration roadmap that we want to do for volunteer engagement. So we will be creating, there will be a knowledge portal for good practices. So if you have experiences in your countries, you have documented experience, you will be able to contribute to this knowledge portal or get some ideas about what other countries are doing. There will also be a global survey. We're also developing SDG acceleration toolkit. So again, if you have worked some of the countries, you have worked with your government in actually seeing, analyzing, and developing programs to leverage volunteer to achieve the SDGs. We'll be working on a toolkit. We will also launch an innovation fund. So this will be circulated throughout Asia Pacific. So if you have a good idea of what you could do to accelerate the implementation of the SDG together with other partners, together with your government, you will be able to apply. It's an open competition that will be launched, if I recall, early January, so that we can really support innovative ideas, so that we can really make a volunteer stakeholder more strongly engaged with the SDG planning and implementation process. So I think that's it. So it's a call for action. I hope this was useful to give a little bit how what you do connects to the bigger picture on the SDGs, and invite you to continue engaging on this plan of action and look for opportunities to share your practice, document, and maybe be one of the winner of the Innovation Fund, no? Globally. Thank you very much.
Good, thank you very much, Manon. I think you gave us not only a very comprehensive overview of the situation, but you've raised the big question, right? How do we account for volunteering contributions in the SDGs? And the good thing about Manon, she gives a problem, but she also starts giving solutions. So that's always much appreciated. Let's see if Adrienne from Australia is going to complement this list of suggested action, because I believe that she will share with us additional suggestions, methodologies, approaches to integrate volunteerism in SDG reporting. Right? So make sure that the contribution of volunteers is indeed accounted for. At least this is what the synopsis says. Right? Now let's see. I love surprises, so I'm sure we'll hear more.
Hopefully won't contradict. Thank you, Renard. And yes, hopefully, I guess I'm going to present more of a national perspective and tying it in with the Voluntary National Review. So I think it's going to tie in a bit with what we've already heard from Manon. So Just before I start, just a little bit about where I come from. So this is my country, Australia. It's one of the most culturally diverse countries on our planet, with almost half of our population was actually born overseas or has at least one parent born overseas. We also have 300 different ancestries in Australia. We're fortunate that we have high levels of volunteering, with over 1/3 of our adult population volunteering in the community, and that's formally. Of course, we know, and Manon touched on this, informally, we don't know the numbers, but we know that people are giving their time much higher numbers than that. And they're contributing over 290 billion Australian dollars to the community each year. But even though we are a prosperous country, we also face some challenges, some severe challenges, just like all countries. And many of our people are at risk of being left behind due to barriers in participation in the workforce and also difficulties in accessing services. And I'm particularly thinking here of Australia's First People, our Indigenous people, our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, and also those groups from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. And when you think about half of our population is born overseas, that's obviously a very high proportion of our population. But also the elderly, and in our ageing population, we know that that's continuing to grow. But people with a disability and also people from rural and remote backgrounds. A lot of Australia is actually desert, so there's a lot of people that are actually geographically isolated. So last year, Australia presented its voluntary national review. And I'm just going to share with you today a bit of the progress that we reported against in that VNR, but also some of the areas that I think that we can do better. And the organisation that I represent, Volunteering Australia, we were really fortunate to be involved in a lot of the discussions during the development of the Voluntary National Review that the government conducted last year and also the end of the year before. But when I was thinking about this presentation, I was remembering that when I first started at Volunteering Australia back in January 2017, I was aware that Australia was going to be preparing its VNR soon. And one of the first things I tried to do was to set up a meeting with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and they were the ones who were actually leading the development of the VNR. And when we attended the meeting, the government representatives were actually wondering why on earth a volunteer peak body or that national body would actually be wanting to have a meeting with them. They hadn't actually at that point understood why we would want to be there and then the reasons for that. And I really realised at that point that there's quite a long way to go in this discussion, and that it was absolutely imperative that we were included as much as possible in those consultations on the VNR, but also that we got to take a key role in communicating about the VNR and helping to collect case studies on behalf of the volunteering sector that we could feed into the Voluntary National Review. So in Australia, as in other countries, the work of volunteers occurs in every sector of our society, in community welfare, the arts, the environment, emergency services, education and sport. And of course, the volunteer impact is felt socially, culturally and economically. So United Nations have recognised at least 4 different types of volunteer activity. The first one is mutual aid or self-help. We also have service to others. The third is participation or civic engagement. And the fourth is advocacy or campaigning. And it's this cross-cutting understanding of volunteering that is highlighted in each of the World State of Volunteerism reports. And I think is key to understanding the role that volunteers play in the SDGs. So as part of the preparations and consultations for the 2030 Agenda, the UN Secretary-General highlighted volunteering as a powerful and cross-cutting means of implementation, able to localise the new agenda by providing new spaces of interaction between governments and people for concrete and scalable actions. I think this way of describing volunteers is very, very powerful, because for the first time it gives us in the volunteering movement a sense of legitimacy. I think for the very first time we have a seat at the table and we really need to be there. No more banging on the drum, trying to prove our worth or our value or our impact. We and the volunteers and the volunteering involving organisations that we represent have been recognised as key stakeholders in saving the world. In fact, without a coordinated volunteer effort, it simply won't happen. Volunteers really are the people power that will get the work done, but they're also the advocates and the change makers. So let's talk a little bit about how the SDGs benefit volunteering and also how volunteering benefits the SDGs. First of all, how do the SDGs benefit volunteering? I think one of the first ways is the SDGs help to increase recognition of volunteering nationally and internationally. The importance placed on the volunteer effort in the 2030 Agenda helps to grow the prominence of the volunteer effort and helps people to take it seriously at every level. And this is reflected in the growing number of countries who have included volunteering in the Voluntary National Review. So in 2016, only 9% of countries included volunteering in their VNR. By 2017, it grew to 40% of countries including volunteering. Last year, it grew to 63%. And whilst this growth is impressive, you know, really there's still room for improvement, because also what that suggests is that 37% of countries still did not recognise volunteers in their VNRs last year. And I'm not sure if you have more up-to-date information about this year, but it'd be great to know that. And the second way that the SDGs help volunteers is that they encourage a new way for volunteers to engage. So volunteering, as we know, can be formal or informal. It can be done in a wide range of ways, and this is obviously reflected in the UN definition. But sometimes we get a mindset about what a volunteer is, about their age, their gender, the kind of role they play, and these stereotypes can limit people from putting their hand up to have a go. What the SDGs do is help us to broaden the way we develop and promote volunteering. They also provide a clear rationale for us to highlight all the different ways that people give time to the community, including disability, in the environment and sustainable agriculture, in aid and development. An example, just a small example that I noticed last year about how we can think differently about the volunteer involvement happened in one state in Australia during their National Volunteer Week event. And at the local Volunteer Centre National Volunteer Week event, the focus was give a little, change a lot, how volunteering contributes to achieving the UN SDGs. And at the event, a war veteran spoke up, and he's also the CEO of an organisation called Homes for Heroes that helps to rehouse newly returned veterans. And he's an advocate for the Sydney Invictus Games. And he spoke very powerfully and very passionately about how volunteer work and advocacy are helping to solve homelessness amongst Australians' war veterans. So I think the third way that SDGs can help volunteers is that they can help to facilitate new partnerships. Agenda 2030 opens up new possibilities for partnerships with groups and institutions that we may never have thought about working with before. And an organisation that springs to mind is Impact 2030, and this was actually mentioned at the last breakout session that I was involved in. Some of you may have heard of Impact 2030, but it's an organisation, it's an SDG initiative by the private sector to enhance corporate employee volunteering. It's now running, I think, in 4 countries, and it brings together a range of stakeholders in the private sector, in civil society, and to make a difference and help employee volunteering to be more recognised and accessible. But how does volunteering benefit the SDGs? You know, really what I think volunteers do is they help to make practical contributions across all the goals. There are so many fantastic examples, and I'm sure within this room we can share some absolutely wonderful examples, some things that you're involved in and know about. One program that springs to mind for me is a program in Melbourne called Putting Down Roots for Asylum Seekers. And this is a food security program for vulnerable migrants run in partnership with a number of high-profile NGOs. Volunteers work alongside newly arrived Australians and teach them about growing their own food. But of course, it's more than that. It's way more than that, because for the vulnerable migrants, it's an opportunity for them to learn English, to make new friends, and to build networks within their community. The other thing is that volunteers build an understanding and an ownership of the goals. Volunteers have a massive difference. They really have made a massive difference in global and local campaigns for public health, for vaccinations, to eradicate polio, for example, or for peace and non-violence through the campaign to ban landmines. Volunteers work both internationally and in their own countries, and are a perfect group to promote the SDGs. Also, volunteers often work at the people-to-people level, and this brings the practical and human side of the goals out and demonstrates in practice what can be achieved. Volunteers also contribute to participatory monitoring and measurement of the goals, and we've already Manon's already touched on this. I think this is one of the most complex aspects of any plan, and one that many of us are really still grappling with. How to monitor and assess in a way that's meaningful and useful. But there is a real role for volunteers to play here in assessment and providing useful data on progress towards the goals. In Tasmania, which is our tiny little island state down the bottom of Australia, where we have the most beautiful wilderness in our country, The State Wilderness Society actively campaigns for the protection of Tasmania's wilderness areas, and they've engaged groups of volunteer citizen scientists, they call them, to collect and record data by doing on-the-ground surveys to identify threatened species, and this provides enormous amounts of information and valuable data that they can then take to policy and decision makers. So I just want to talk a little bit about being left behind, because obviously that's one of the very powerful pledges of the SDGs, leaving no one behind. I think it's about acknowledging that in our world, some of us are actually suffering a lot more than others, but that we also have the capacity and the resources to alleviate their extreme poverty and to address the inequalities and the discrimination. In a discussion paper by the UN Development Programme, they suggest that the key factors people get left behind when they lack choices and opportunities to participate in and benefit from progress. And they outline 5 key factors as to why people are left behind. The first one is discrimination, and this is of course about biases in gender, in ethnicity, age, class, disability, sexual orientation, migratory status, nationality, etc. And then the second one is geography, not being able to access services or make contact with other people due to isolation or missing or inferior public services. The third one is governance, and that's where people face disadvantage when global or national institutions are unjust. The fourth is social economic status, and of course this comes down to income and education and access to stable employment. And the last one is shocks or fragility, and this is when people are more exposed to vulnerable setbacks due to impacts of climate change, natural hazards, violence and conflict. This is sobering for us all, but it isn't just in developing countries that we need to ensure that nobody is left behind, but in developed countries as well. In Australia, our first people are being left behind, and their life expectancy, for example, is 8.6 years lower than the non-Indigenous population. They have lower employment rates, training and skill levels. They have much poorer health, limited opportunities, discrimination, and lower levels of job retention. So we've talked a bit about the work that's happening at the organisational level, but what about the role of advocacy bodies like Volunteering Australia? So all over the world, there are advocacy organisations whose reason for being is to speak on behalf of a group of people and represent them with decision makers. So groups like Volunteering Australia, we call ourselves a peak body, but really what that means is that we're a representative body, and our role is to represent the volunteering movement in Australia. And I like to talk about it in terms of we're like a conduit of information. We have an information flow between government and the sector, and between the sector and government, and we need to ensure that that information flow is continuous and effective. As I mentioned earlier, when we first had our meeting with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, they were not thinking about the volunteering contribution when they were first developing the VNR. But from that first meeting, the VNR meant that they really needed to engage with a range of stakeholders, and we were really pleased to be part of that. We participated in the Australian Sustainable Development Goals Summit, which was co-convened by the government and civil society, as well as meeting with many other government departments and not just limiting ourselves to foreign affairs and trade, because of course, like in every other country, our governments are organised in silos, so in order to address the goals, we really need to be meeting with pretty well every government department. But we really wanted to make sure that volunteering was front and centre of the VNR and the approach. So primarily the development of the VNR was driven by the federal government, but this was done in consultation with civil society and the business sector. But we can't just rely on governments to implement the 2030 agenda. In the same way, we can't rely on advocacy groups to spread the message about the SDGs on their own. And this for me is what is one of the most empowering aspects of the SDGs, because they require us to make a really significant mind shift. They require us to have a sense of urgency and to take responsibility for our planet. They're also about us taking responsibility for implementing in our own regions, not expecting others to make it happen, but acknowledging that we are all leaders and co-creators of the future. If we are to deliver on the targets of the SDGs, we need more people to hear about them and understand the benefits. And it's really up to each and every one of us to spread the word, to speak about the SDGs at every opportunity, to include them in our constitutions, in our organisational constitutions, in our key documents, as well as in our daily practice. Even in a country like Australia, even after us delivering our voluntary national review last year, I still wouldn't be confident to assume that most people have heard about the SDGs. And so right here in this room, we have leaders within the volunteering movement from Asia Pacific. And I think we need to consider how we spread the word about the SDGs at every level and embed them into all of our messages. Our combined governments have set the intention, but the realisation of the agenda requires active and engaged participation of people, of all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adrienne. We took a little trip to Australia and looked at the situation there, but which I think is not very uncommon, right, to a lot of the countries where we work. And whether it is how, as we heard already from Manon, volunteerism is taken into account, or the very, I think, important role that the volunteer especially can play when looking at the Leave No One Behind, right, kind of underline title of Agenda 2030. I think this is somewhere where you all, with your fellow volunteers, can really contribute very well. Let's come back from Australia, do a quick transfer of flights in Suvarnabhumi, and take a local flight down to the deep south. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Hat Yai, where we have an eminent professor of epidemiology who is, through a very interesting personal pathway, has gone from epidemics. Maybe this is what you are. You're spreading the epidemics of volunteerism. And I think that's pretty contagious, but that's good stuff, right? Let's hear from Professor, I don't want to make it wrong, so because I know it's complicated, but I want to make sure I get it right. Virasak. Kun Virasak is going to tell us his story from Prince of Songkhla University.
Thank you very much, Leonard. I guess not so many people are older than me in this room. Before going to what I want to talk, I just want to reflect these SDGs and volunteerism in impromptu reaction to what the previous two speakers mentioned. Who know in this room what is the mother of SDG? What is the mother of SDG? MDG. Okay. So if we have MDGs, I think only half of the people in this room will be involved. Why? Because MDG is related to poverty, bad health, a lot of things, right? I asked Thai people and Chinese students and Thai students, they don't know what is MDG because they're not involved. I think only in the poorer country, nowadays we call LMIC. Before, there's a lot of country that I work with is LDC, least developed countries. Now they all upgrade into middle income countries like Bangladesh, for example, make very good progress. Even Ethiopia, after the big famine in the late 70s, there's a big leap in become the centers, the capital of Africans. So I think MDG finished leaving only few countries behind. Why they are behind? Mostly because of peace problem. There are a lot of fighting. You mentioned it in few parts of the world. When there's peace, there's no way to get rid of poverty. So I think I try to listen to what UN say and try to formulate what my personal strategy would be coincide with. The MDG get only few people involved, but the daughter side, SDG, is really fertile. You got 17. Why so many things in SDG? We call parthenogenesis. It means no need to get fertilization. You can get offspring. There's some animal can do that. Some fruit, a lot of fruits is we call parthenocarpy. You don't have to have the pollen fertilization. You can get the fruit out of it. So maybe it's good in one thing that we got more people in the world involved with SDG, both rich and the poor country. Okay, and expanding to this, we want to mobilize more people. That's why volunteerism come out. My talk is not. My background is not much related to volunteers organization. Not a manager or volunteer. Personally, I'm a medical doctor, public health doctor. Work in Deep South. I grown up in this South and work more than 30 years there. I have a lot of Deep South students who are got special quota. If based on competition system, they cannot get into medical school, but because they are from poor areas, so they got special quotas and get in. So I volunteer to be special mentor for them. That's 30, 40 years ago. Half of them quit it because they cannot pass that high standard of medical school. But the one who survived become my social capital because they work in the Deep South. They are the local people where there's a conflicts. So they are my stronghold in that difficulty area. So when you work with your volunteer heart, you have something in return, not that you don't expect. And that things you can do more further. So in 2004, there was eruptions of violence in the Deep South. Up to now, there's several thousands of people killed in that violence. In the early 2004, our sky become dark. There's no hope. You go anywhere, you are afraid of being attacked by unknown people. My colleagues in another university, our university, but in the further Deep South campus, one of the department or the staff want to resign because it's not so compatible to work. But I'm local, I cannot move. So what should we do in the darkness and fears? So I think we should use some kind of strategy to resolve the problems. So with my background of having so many, social capital in the areas, I formulate the strategy that we have to revitalize local people to solve their own problems. So the volunteerism is not like conventional volunteer where you have middle class people want to join you to get some score in order to get good CV, to enter good universities or doing PhD. But our volunteer is we have to build from within and coming out. So, but I think that is coming by heart, not by personal benefit. Yes, there are personal benefit. If the area become peaceful, it's directly benefit to all of them. So this volunteerism come from heart, not because of you get a stamp and you get in your CVs. So I think after I get this idea that we should have volunteerism and how to work with it, we have to identify stakeholder. We have in Thammasat University, we have Dr. Pui volunteers. Dr. Pui is a professor in economics. He created this volunteer program in the university and sent middle class people to work with the rural. But I say, our program would be different. We got the volunteer, local volunteer, and build their capacity to solve their own problem. I said, if eventually this Deep South province has to separate from Thailand, the government don't like to hear this. But we still have people working in there, our volunteers, our people. And they will, the local people have their own determination, whether they want to stay with us, whether they want to leave. If they leave, they will live more peacefully. If they stay, they will stay more peacefully. If we build up this joining capacity, it would be important. So this volunteerism is based on the idea that I have the words called saponifications. This is chemistry. Saponification, you have on one side, you have water, and the other side, you have lipids. Water and lipid cannot mix because by some chemistry. One is the chemistry is not the same. So the soap has the molecular property. On one hand, it can mix with water. On the other hand, it can mix with lipid. So we try to build these local people in between the two extremes, between two aggressions. If the hypothesis is that if we could strengthen this part, eventually it would be more sustainable peace, not just because the head of the two sides sign some negotiation to truce. If the local people cannot work together, then it's difficult. But these local people can work on one part, they work on this side, the other, we work on the other side. So we based on volunteerism and not just students. We have a lot of volunteers, for example. We have volunteers from Bangkok who want to contribute their maybe 1 month work in the Deep South to train people how to make handicrafts so that these widows can have some contribution and have some incomes. So the formulation for us is that we have to mobilize these people to work together. And we are in football, we call the midfield. In midfield, you have to come up, protect your goal and try to shoot the others. So working between the no man's land areas and the central governments, we have to have people who can work in both. Mobilize donations and make sure that this donation, in donation, I think donation, if they donate by heart, I think this is good for them, and also some of them want to go to see the situations. So this kind of, I call volunteerism, not just volunteers. So we set up three main organizations. One is relief and reconciliation organizations. We mobilize people who wanted to do this work and have some consolidation, have some training together. And so they visit the victim's house. This we call co-approach would be more sustainable than human rights. Because when you say human right, people will say human wrong. You are wrong humans. So when we do the rehabilitation, everybody say, okay, then we can mobilize people to do this rehabilitation and eventually become reconciliations. So we set up the foundation called Deep South Centers for Relief and Reconciliation Foundations. Consists of two parts, the Muslim and the Buddhist and the local people and people from Bangkok to work together in this one. The second part is the volunteer, we call graduate volunteer. I have, there is Ad, please stand up. So these are our team, Ad and her team here. She's a nurse. Kun Ad, Mrs. Wallapa, was a nurse in burn unit. When there was a SARS outbreak, one SARS patient, suspected SARS, admitted into our hospital. She volunteers. Okay, I will look after this, and she built up the team of nurses to look after. This kind of mentality is really volunteers, and she lead the team to take care of the patient. So when we set up this program, she quit her job as a nurse, reduced her salary, and worked with all of us, and being the managers of several her children. I think she has more than 200 students who are the volunteer under her training programs. So this volunteer training program, as I said, different from conventional, not middle class, but local people. We try to mobilize them, give them the opportunity to expose to the outside world. Just less than 1 year after the eruption of violence, there was another bad disaster, that is tsunami. In tsunami, we have to mobilize a lot of people out to help the people. So we deploy this volunteer to work 6 months in the tsunami area. So the Deep South area is now expanded. Eventually, it covers the whole southern Thailand of about 10 million populations with all the province. So the volunteerism go on, and we have a peace as our main business. Okay. In fact, peace is number 16, right? 16, Without peace, you cannot have good environment. So we identify that we cannot just stay in local Deep South, because nearby there was a problems before between Aceh and the Indonesian governments. They have similar problem. The local people fought with the central governments, and about 20,000 people killed, including 2 university presidents. So it's very bad, but the tsunami has wiped out all the conflicts. So I voluntarily identify and go into Aceh to identify the opportunity to work together. We wrote a proposal in the floor of a house that is saved from tsunami. Wrote the proposal and get the funding from Lockheed Martin Foundations and Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to link these two affected areas together. The both area affected by man-made and also natural disaster. So we set up the system, volunteer system in ADRIENNE, train volunteers to do the community work and also these similar things and sister village together. And we work very close, now it's more than 10 years with ADRIENNE. I have a lot of number of students from ADRIENNE coming to study with us with our scholarship and their own scholarships. So the thing is that when you have this program running, sometimes you have to institutionalize. For me, personally, my job is not volunteer administration. I do this because we need to have some tools to solve the problem. And volunteerism is one of the best because you cannot rely on government. You cannot have any business to do peace. You have only the heart, the volunteer people to do. But now we come into, I would say, semi-post-conflict period. So what would be the new business of currently the graduate volunteer program is directly under the university. Before it was under our project. Now it's under university. The university adopts the whole program into its system. But what to do next? Now we have to learn from you here. Because we learn from Thammasat, we learn from this morning, we learned from the Philippines, we learned from Mongolia. I think this is what's next. So we have to learn from you what to do next. But our parts, we still have to engage on our area, but maybe the collaboration is important. What lesson learned? I think for me, the lesson learned is when there's a crisis, there's an opportunity for volunteerism. You got higher opportunities than normal because you get the real volunteerism, not just because of the indirect benefit. But heart alone is not enough. You have to have the head, what to do, what to organize, how to train them to be working with people at the affected area, how to protect them. This morning I heard from our colleagues from the Philippines saying that we have to protect our volunteers. Don't go into a dangerous area. We are in the opposite side. We work with the dangerous area, and they don't feel any dangers. But I think that as a leader, the leader should have the what you call courageous to work into difficult paths, difficult physical difficulties, cultural difficulties. I have been working in North Korea for 3 times. So it's very difficult when we are from the free world to work in that areas. I work with in some very fundamental societies in South Asia. So I work in many places, but I think we have to train our volunteers to have the courage, to have the guts that you have to do some things, and that you have the heart and have the head, how to be able to survive and make some change. I think that is important. And finally, I think we have this principle, but this principle has to go along very well with the personal interest of our volunteers. Ideology can work for a short while, but in long term, people should gain benefit by working in volunteerism. But the benefit need not be financial or monetary. As we have one of the 9 rules. One is recognition, but more than recognition inside oneself, if they can learn and they can have the internal part that they feel achievement, that is even more interesting. I still have to learn from you how to make this volunteerism sustainable in our areas, and how to get the other aspect of SDG that we can get involved. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Virasak, for this late afternoon lesson of humanity. I think it was a very nice way of looping, the conversation that we have started from maybe a more UN-ish technical angle, very important in terms of accounting the value also of volunteerism. A trip to Australia to hear about how volunteerism and SDG actually reinforce each other in a mutual positive way. And hearing, I think, the very interesting testimony of a hardcore believer in the power of the heart supported by the head, and how self-motivation really pushes the community to take its matters in its own hands. And that's also the power of volunteerism. So thank you all very much for the 3 panelists. If we can have a round of applause for their contribution. I know there is some exciting, more social leisure elements in your program for after this panel, so I don't want to run late, but I think we have a few minutes, and I'd like to offer an opportunity for a few of you to ask any questions or provide any comments to this rich conversations that we've just had. So if I could just see some hands, and then we'll take a few at the same time, and then we'll do this. And we have roughly 3 hours and 45 minutes to do that. No, we have 9 minutes, so we have to hurry. Okay, so right there, first one, and then we'll have here. Yes,
okay,
please.
good afternoon. I just heard Professor Virasak refer to the presentation I made this morning, and it just struck me that I think we in IAVE and the other volunteer organizations have to be aware of the diversity in volunteer organizations and the types of volunteer efforts. We work with different demographics, different institutions, and our objectives also vary depending on it. I was just a bit worried when you said that we have to teach our volunteers to be courageous. And it struck me, I got worried because saying that volunteers must not, or our volunteers do not go into high-risk situations might be interpreted as a lack of courage, when in fact, okay, the courage is exhibited in many ways. So I was thinking, maybe we just have to realize that there are different forms and different types of volunteer organizations.
Thank you for this comment. Let's move and switch sides of the room. Yes, please.
Hi, my question is for ADRIENNE. So in this background of the fact that Nepal has signed up for second time VNR for 2020, so, and again, when you have presented, you have mentioned that database shows that the issue of volunteerism is quite low, and you are perfectly all right. If I have to compare Nepal, for example, in 2017, the issues of volunteerism was not there at all. And in 2020, we have now trying to coordinate with many other agencies, some from VSO, including UNV and other agencies. We are trying to make sure that volunteerism is incorporated in the VNR. So that discussion is still monologue because government has not really started that dialogue. And that still is a monologue of government. So the idea is we want to make this a dialogue. But my question for ADRIENNE in this context, based on your experience, so what are your key suggestions for organizations like us to make sure that dialogue is really productive? At the same time, what suggestions do you have for your volunteers to make sure that their voices are really heard and meaningful.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments in the audience?
Hello.
Before, yes, please,
Yes,
sir.
Ui Kitikun from Laos. Just want to clarify a little bit, just to bear in mind to everyone, according to my awareness, regarding the SDG. In Laos, we have 18. So as a global, they have 17. So number 18 for Laos and Cambodia, maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, is the unexploded ordnance. So that's all. Thank you.
Good, and I'm sure you have a lot of volunteers who work in this area on SDG 18 also.
Yes.
Right. Okay, so let's turn back to the panel, and maybe Adrienne, if you want to help
I think
our
it's
colleagues from Nepal.
Really good and really important question, and I guess my response would be that I wouldn't be waiting for the government to approach you. I would actually be starting those conversations yourselves, and I would look to Goal 17 partnerships and consider what other organisations that you could actually start to partner with that will help to amplify your voice, particularly the NGO voice, because I think that really needs to be strongest. And often I think we do get, often I think the volunteer effort and NGOs themselves were minimised or seen as sort of the third least important sector, whereas I actually think that we need to amplify our voices. And the best way that we can do that, I think, is by joining with like-minded strategic partners that have got similar values to your own that will help to do that.
Very good. So, Nepal, good luck. But we'll be monitoring this. Yes, sir. Please, can we have a mic? First row in the middle. Thank you.
I'm from Bangladesh. As you probably know, that Bangladesh government, based on this 17 goal, they have set 39 plus indicators. And they are providing training to the NGOs, to the civil society organization and other stakeholders, with the support of UNDP and other ministries. All ministries are involved, including planning ministry, as she said. The problem I see is, this is a question to UNDP particularly. Do you face any problem of getting, because you are to report back to New York or somewhere, so far I know. So do you find any challenges of getting report timely from this Asia Pacific region you are working with? Because I found some problem in our country also. UNDP is pursuing, give me report, give us the report, So this is what is going on. I don't know about other countries. So that's the question.
So it's to report in a timely manner? Is that what you're saying, the reporting? The reporting system and cycle for the SDGs is actually quite, first it's a volunteer review, no? So each country decide when they want to report. So every year a number of countries decide, okay, this year I will report. I know Thailand, for example, they do even internal reports, even if they're not reporting every year in New York to the high-level political forum. And it's very time-bound because there are deadlines set by New York, which is the high-level political forum taking place in July. But the challenge that I saw so far is that some countries starts very late, the process. And once the process is late, the danger, and you just hire someone who's going to write you something and then send it. No? And that's the whole point of starting from way behind, and the whole stakeholder engagement we were talking about earlier, and how you create this platform for engagement way ahead the deadline. No? So I can say in the region, governments are very at different level. And you have in each country, the resident coordinator office of the UN are actually the one providing the support and liaising with the government on this. ESCAP is also the Economic Commission here in Bangkok is providing support, trying to really, asking on your question, Nepal, really promoting multi-stakeholder engagements, no? But as I said earlier, there are some good examples, and I name again Mongolia and Pakistan who are shared. They have gone through this process. They've been really engaged, and maybe they want to share as well outside of the session, no? So, some tips on how they've managed to bring that connection together between planning ministries and volunteer organization. No? Thank you.
if I can compliment, I'll take off my hat of moderator to put the head of the UNDP, but I mean, this is a response vis-a-vis VNRs, right? There's a methodology, there's a regularity in it. But from what we've seen, what we've observed, a VNR is basically a click, right? It's a picture. It's fairly static. It's where we are today against, those SDGs and within the indicators. Some countries are taking a more proactive approach to do more analytical reports. Right? And some even have, and it's the case of Nepal where I was before, where the country decided to do a kind of a roadmap report with milestone. If we want to achieve by 2030 those SDGs, this is where we should be by 2020, by 2025. And then they prepare a report based on data, of course, but which is more vision-oriented, right? Which really, they use the SDGs to project the country towards the target, the 2030 deadline. And I think those reports often offer a very good entry point for discussions at national level, right? Because then it also varies, in what street do you want to turn, right? So you define a kind of a roadmap in a much more dynamic way through those reporting. But that's really left to each country to decide how they want to do this. Okay, change. We have a question on this side, here. Another one here. Okay, the clock is ticking. Yes.
Okay, first of all, thank you for all your good presentations. It was very informative. My question is a little bit more towards ambitious thinking, because I'm from Pakistan. My name is Surshid. I'm working with VSO. We did a lot of work in Pakistan to make that volunteer at the community levels and bringing to national. My question is more towards like how we can build some global standards where we can develop like some volunteers without borders, because looking towards the ethnic, cultural, religious, all those to be, because that should not be a barriers for them. Because when we talk that each countries, they're doing their own, as for example, VNR process in their countries, but they may follow their own processes of volunteering. Although that's good, we are contributing somewhere. But the question is more toward coming out of that box. How we can, it's a question of more ambitious one, but maybe that's to you and the moderator and even all of my panelists, how we can come out of those one, and there any strategies, any things we can come of that one. Yeah.
Very good question. I'll let them. We had another question. Yes, please.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and also I'm very inspired by your presentation. But one issue that I would like to address here is from what Dr. Veerasak has mentioned about volunteering in fragile space or in the conflicted areas. And this is one of the issues that we also discussing among ourselves in the organization, when we also trying to consider the safety, health, and also safeguarding of our volunteers as number one priorities, making sure that the area that they're going, their safety is number one. And sometimes we have to withdraw them from the area. But however, in that area, actually people are in need in terms of the support from volunteers. So I would like to hear, from UNV and also maybe from Australian experiences in terms of volunteer working in the conflicted areas. So what are the guidance, or how can we also support that to happen, because people are actually in need?
Okay, let's turn. Was there anyone else lined up? Okay, one more, and then we'll turn back to the panel.
Yeah, hello. My name is Nicholas. I'm from Singapore. So I have a question for all three of you. My question is very simple. So how can we connect the hate as well as to our heart when it comes to volunteering? Because I think it's really important when we talk about volunteering. It really has to come from the heart, but also we need the hate, both connection. So how do we do about it? Thank you.
Okay, so we have 3 questions. Who would want to take a shot at the first one?
Start. The first one on standards, no global standard. That's a very good question. I think if you look historically, no, the volunteer, there was first very little on volunteering in the global south. It was really seen as a northern concept, you know, the north going to help, very traditional way or very charity focused, no, I'm going to go and help the poor. I think over years, the concept has really evolved much more from a citizen engagement, participation, local, north to south, south to south, a lot of new programs at the global and international level. And volunteering sector was not very organized. Actually, IAVE is the only global organization that bring the sectors together. There's no other, you have global organizations like VSO, you're part of it, you have UNVs, the UN arm, you have, but that's it, there is no other. So to start discussing standard, you also need to organize, I think, the sector, because who defines those standards? What are they? It's so anchored at the local level. So I think that's a very good question, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, and I'm looking at Hataya here, I think VSO has initiated, has taken a bit of a leadership globally to start those conversations around standards, and maybe, Hataya, you could elaborate, or maybe there was a session on that, but I think it's really for the sector to come together and to start having those conversations around developing some global sector, no? That's the first one. The one on building the heart with the head, I like that question a lot now, because I think my presentation was really a bit focused on the head and you were really the heart, no? I think I was a bit on the theoretical part, no? But I have a strong heart, don't worry. That's where I think, and I think that's one of the challenge for the volunteer sector, is everybody found it's nice, it's from the heart, it's beautiful, it's so, you know, no one can be against it. That's the hard part. For me, the head is how we organize it. It's exactly about how we make sure the sector is structured, organized, has mechanism for recognitions, mechanism of dialogues, of, if needed, policy framework or not, what are the key elements, security, safety of volunteers, like that. We look at it more from a strategic perspective, that we have conversations and dialogue with key development players from the government on how we can align the sector in a more effective way. And this is where I think the head comes in, no? And that's, if you mix the two together, then I think we can really, when we talk about SDG acceleration, we can really, really have multiply the effect that all our organizations are having right now, no?
There was a question on the shield. The shield for the heart and for the hand and for the head, right? Okay. The question on our colleague for volunteers working in fragile and conflict settings.
Yeah, I'm happy to just touch on that
beep,
one.
beep, 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 beep.
I think that's
Guys,
the
we're
bus.
so over time.
The buses are leaving.
The buses are leaving, so we need to wrap up. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Quick.
Oh, I was just, really, really quick. Just to say, volunteers are a part of your workforce. And I guess in my view, there's pretty well no role that a volunteer can't or shouldn't do. I mean, I think that, but it really comes down to the same duty of care that you have for your paid workforce. And that really comes down to training, and it comes down to resources and insurance and protecting your volunteers. So I really think it's about really thinking about the duty of care when you're sending volunteers into conflicted areas. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you all very much. Big round of applause for ADRIENNE, Manon, and Professor Virasak. Thank you all very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you for a great panel. That was excellent and very well facilitated. Thank you very much. Guys, very quickly, the buses leave for the boat cruise at 5:30. I just did the Google Maps of what's the time if it leaves at 5:30 versus 6. It's quite a difference. So get there at 5:30 to save yourself time in the traffic. 5:30 in the lobby, and we're back here tomorrow morning. So 5:30 downstairs.